participatory in reviewing the employment guidelines.
I'll burn through the rest of this as quick as I can. So, Dan, we're in the midst of looking at the employment guidelines. And so I'm down near the third bullet from the bottom. Wage scales have just been updated to reflect the latest MMA wage survey. We did have a situation where we had an employee who started using vacation time before she had passed her 6-month probationary period. And so we decided it was a good idea to make people get past their probationary period before they start using their accrued vacation time. And then lastly, the town pays for health insurance on a monthly basis beginning on the first month in which the employee is employed on the first day of the month. And so we just need to make that clear in the policy. That's the practice, but it's not actually in the policy. And then we want to include also that the use of the town's health reimbursement account ends on the final day of employment, because otherwise if their final day is the second day of the month, they can continue using that HRA through the end of the month on the town's dime. So that was something we wanted to add in there as well. And then that last sentence, that last paragraph, you can just nix that. Dan and I had a chance to talk about that. And so we're going to just apply what we normally do for comp time to our firefighters, see how that works. And if for some reason we need to come back with a different proposal, we'll do that at some future date.
So Anthony, that last piece there, was that mostly reflective of the fire department? And
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Dan McKenzie and you had a chat.
Dan McKenzie, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
I was trying to piece it together. I'm like, what would Dan have to do with that? Then I was like, wait, we have another Dan. Okay, so hey, there's Kathy. We can't hear you, but unmute yourself, woman.
There we are.
There she is. Okay, so one of the things that jumps out at me is bullet point number 2, saying that candidates must pass a physical exam. When you look further into our employment guidelines, it clearly states that we are non-discriminatory, not based on handicap is one of the things that has been identified. I would sincerely hope that we do not consider folks for employment if they can't pass a physical exam. I mean, yeah, somebody in a wheelchair could be sorting recyclables. And so that would put an undue burden on someone who probably already has enough burdens to deal with.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered that, Melanie. I mean, obviously, we have had in the past people with physical disabilities working for the town. I guess my concern was, we want to make sure that someone is physically able to do a job that is a physical job. And so, for instance, we had a workers' comp case where a guy, if you were just to see him walking around, he seemed fine, but he was after his workers' comp case, he was no longer physically capable of doing the job. And so that was our thinking there. But I'm open to suggestions, as to what you think we should do in that regard.
Why don't we consult with, there's an Office of Handicap, I can't remember what it's called, but there, as part of the Labor Department, there's a section that deals with, workers with disabilities of all kinds. I wonder what their, how they state it and how they place it. Just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Is this, have the employees seen this and the full-time employees, and what do they think of it?
I've discussed some of this with them. I have had it reviewed by our town clerk and our treasurer, but I've not shared it with everybody who's a full-time employee.
I might suggest that be done.
Okay.
I will go to bullet number 1. about the courtesy interview. Um, if you don't do something like that, how are you gonna gain any people that really want to stay with this town? I mean, they want to advance some. I mean, so they don't get it. It's good to interview. I recommend it all the time. In fact, I've interviewed a lot of people that probably were not qualified for the job, but I gave them the courtesy to come in and do the interview like everybody else would.
Yeah. Well, again, Rick, I use the example of if
I heard your example.
Bill were to leave, you should not, and I really wanted to be the facility maintenance director. You should not interview me. That would be a waste of everybody's time and energy because I am in no way qualified for that job.
But it's not a waste of your time if you think you do have it. It's not a waste of your time, as I'm concerned. You know what? You may not be qualified for it, but it doesn't do any harm to come in. It's a short interview. Bingo, you're out the door. That's just my opinion.
If I may,
And
It's-
let me go my second one, Ernie, if I can.
yeah, go ahead.
On the lunch breaks, we ran into this a few years ago, and we checked with the Department of Labor, I believe. They have to leave their desk. They have to go. They can't be answering the telephone or anything during this time. So what kind of is the plan there? That kind of caught my eye right off the bat. I see what you're kind of doing, but yet there is some laws and regulations I think we need to make sure we're following.
Yeah, so I can just tell you what the practice is, Rick, and that is all of our office employees do take a lunch break. It is an hour long. They don't sit at their desk and work as they are eating their lunch. I'm the only one who typically does that.
You don't get a lunch break anyways.
That's fine. And so the practice is that yeah, I mean, people do get up and they either go to their homes and have lunch, or they go to the boardroom and sit in the boardroom and read a book while they had their lunch or whatever.
So as far as the 2 15-minute breaks, that's a courtesy from the state of Maine. There isn't anything that says that you have to provide 2 15-minute breaks. So that isn't anywhere we've ever been, wishy-washy. We've been like, go ahead, take it, tag it on with your half an hour for your lunch break. So my concern is, and I know that state law does say that you can waive your right to have a lunch break. But I don't, honestly, for the life of me, I don't understand why we don't value the employees enough to insist that partway through their workday, they take a mental break and a physical break from what it is they're doing. And I understand if they're still on and it's a 40-hour work week and they normally aren't getting paid for that hour. Now they're working 40 hours, potentially 45, if they normally would have clocked out for that hour for lunch. Because you're not required in the state of Maine to pay folks for that lunch break, but you are required to offer that break. So do we go from 40 hours to 45 hours a week, which puts people on a time and a half scale, which then that's not the purpose of it. Or how are we looking at doing that? I personally think that folks deserve at least a half an hour, can unpaid, step away, take a breather, do whatever it is they want to do, smoke 28 cigarettes, I don't care. But that you have a right to take a mental break from your day, from your job for that half an hour.
So let me explain how it happens. Let's say first with our office employees. So they clock in at 8, work till noon, clock out for an hour, clock back in, and then work till 5. So they have their 8 hours. In the summertime, our maintenance folks prefer to get started early because it is light early, and then get done early. And so they have, it has been their practice, or at least it was this past summer, that they would clock in at 6, and then they would clock out at 8. They would work 8 straight hours, and then they'd be done for the day. Now, please understand that no one is being forced to work without a lunch break. That if anyone who wants a lunch break can take a lunch break of any duration from, a few minutes up to an hour during the course of their day. It's only if they prefer just to work through the day without taking a break so that they can be done earlier that they sign the waiver. So this practice predates me. I thought it was unusual, but the guys who signed that waiver seem to prefer it that way.
So facilities maintenance would get to leave earlier at the end of the day. Does a transfer station employee leave before the end of the day?
So let's say today is Wednesday, and so they reported to work at 11 because that's when the transfer station opens. They work till 7. If they take a lunch break, they either report earlier than 11 and work to 7 or a little past 7. For those who have signed the waiver, they work from 11 to 7.
This one sticks in my craw. It stuck in my craw the last time that we discussed this too.
Well, and again, it doesn't matter to me necessarily, but I do know that it is something that some of our employees do prefer. They do prefer just to show up early, work 8 hours, and then go live the rest of their lives.
But if you do it for one, you gotta do it for everybody, as far as I'm concerned. Said that.
Right.
Oh, everyone has the option.
So how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna do that in the town office? You could be short-staffed when it comes to the end of the day.
Yeah, so from a practical standpoint, Rick, I don't see anyone in the town office wanting to work 8 straight hours without taking a lunch break.
I have a hard job believing that the ones that are doing that are not stopping and having lunch.
If you want to end the practice, that is y'all's prerogative. Again, this predates me. I thought this was a long time practice of the town, and some of the employees seem to prefer that. But if you guys would rather end that practice, that does not give me heartburn.
I think we've had this discussion before. Am I correct, Melanie?
Well, that's what I said, is it stuck in my craw the last time too. I mean, you look at, say the VA, and my hours there were 8 to 4:30. Gazillion years ago when I worked there. Why 8 to 4:30? Because you're not paid for a half an hour. So you stay till 4:30 because you get a half an hour for a lunch break earlier in the day. So, but you're only going to get paid for 8 hours a day. So anyhow, just trying to figure that out. I don't want folks to feel like, I don't want peer pressure. I don't want folks to feel like they have to work through a potential break. Because everybody else is doing it or whatever. I feel like across the board, we should say, and you can stagger them however you need to do it, but it's important to us that you get a chance to take a break during the day. Doesn't have to be for a whole hour. Sometimes a whole hour is a really long time.
Well, Maine state law says
So
that
you
they,
can waive it.
sorry?
Says you can sign a waiver.
Well, it says Maine state law requires employers to give employees the opportunity to take an unpaid rest break of 30 consecutive minutes after 6 hours worked, if 3 or more people are on duty. Pretty simple statement. An employee and an employer may negotiate for more or less breaks, but both must agree, and it should be in writing. So there you are. I mean,
So
this employment, this meal and rest break thing seems to be, at first glance, consistent with what the main labor laws are. Beyond that, I sort of like what Ricky had to say about employees taking a look at this section or any piece of this employee handbook and making comments and offering suggestions. Was it that bad, folks?
No, no, I just am, I'm
Is that
kind of
good?
rereading it and I'm feeling like I'm not ready to sign off on that one again. I feel like the last time we reviewed this, that I signed off on it and I really just felt kind of like, ugh.
Well, I'm not saying sign off on it. I'm saying that, we're consistent with Maine state law with this. But if we want to take another step and have employees take a look at it and, sort of make a consensus as to how they're feeling about things, that's also consistent with state law.
Right. And when you look at the state law, though, it looks like it could be negotiated between an employee and the employer.
Yes,
But
it needs to be in writing.
right, but not a blanket, like, by the way, 15-minute breaks and a half-hour lunch are gone.
Right.
And
Well-
you folks have an option to sign a waiver, but you folks don't. So like the folks who work, say, at the rec center in the summertime that work full-time. Do
Well,
we tell
according
them that we're ending their half-hour lunch break?
Well, it seems to me that it's all employees have the option of negotiating. That's the way it sounds in the law.
But it doesn't look, so what we're saying here is it says the end of 15-minute breaks and 30-minute lunch breaks for full-time employees. We can't end it. You have to offer folks the opportunity to take a half an hour unpaid lunch after they've worked. So if they're working 6 or more consecutive hours a day, you have to offer them a half an hour unpaid lunch. And if we offer a waiver program, I think this was Ricky's point, is if you offer a waiver program to certain segments of the staff, then it has to be consistent across the board. Am I correct there, Ricky? And then how do we do that? I mean, I'm all for, I also see maybe you're not stopping for lunch, but if you swing into Christie's and grab a slice of pizza
That's
and
stopping for lunch.
and you sit in the truck for 5 minutes and choke it down, you just took a lunch break.
Yep. Yep.
And then you leave a half hour early at the end of the day. So, we had the same issues when, working with the time clock stuff. Was some folks were more affected than others. So how do we make a blanket employment guideline recommendation that stays consistent with state law and is fair to all of the employees?
I can't seem to find a bullet sheet here, but what I'm looking at is in the actual document, section 6, work week hours. And I'm looking for where it says ending the breaks and that sort of stuff, but I don't see it. I only see what is written in the book. And
So there on page 7,
Yep.
if you're looking, are you looking at the red line version, Kathy?
I am looking at the red line version.
Okay, so you see there's a paragraph that says meal and rest periods.
Yep.
And then there is a paragraph above that that is.
Above that, where it says break period, I
Yeah.
see. And that's redlined, except that I have a black and white copy, so
Yeah,
it's actually black lined, but anyway. All right, thank you. I see that. So where do we go from here?
Well, and it seems, so I'm glad we're reviewing this because we do have inconsistencies. So it looks like for certain employees, what was currently being offered were 2 15-minute breaks and a half an hour lunch. But then transfer station and facilities maintenance, it was considered a 1 hour lunch break. So by main state law, you don't pay people for their break time. You can offer them that. It's not, you don't have to offer it, and you don't have to pay for it.
Well, and let me be clear, no one is being paid for their lunch hour or their lunch break.
Right, no, so I'm just trying to pull the two pieces together. Because we've essentially lumped the lunch break and the potential for breaks into a 1 hour lunch break for certain employees.
Yeah. So previously, the policy said that the normal work schedule offers a 15-minute break period during each 4-hour segment of an 8-hour day. And then the next paragraph said a meal/rest period will be provided in the amount of 1/2 hour. And so, I mean, the way the policy was written before, that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to take 30 minutes for lunch and then 2 15-minute breaks. And the reason I'm suggesting a change is that's simply not the practice. For instance, the people who work at the town office typically take a 1 hour lunch break. And as I said, some of those folks leave and go home and have lunch. And so if they had a 30-minute lunch break, then they wouldn't really have the opportunity to do that, to run home and grab something to eat and then get back to the office within 30 minutes. And so the practice has simply been everyone takes a lunch hour or an hour-long break during lunch. And so, I was just trying to change the policy to reflect the practice.
Practice, yes. I get that. I get that. My
Anybody-
issue is that why is it just transfer station and facilities maintenance?
Yeah, and again, Kathy, that's simply been the
Practice?
practice. Yeah.
So the library, the rec center, where do they fall?
They take lunch breaks.
If I may,
Yes, please.
we're a small enough organization to kind of have some flexibility, I think, to some degree with certain employees, between those employees and their department heads, managers. I don't know. I think if certain people wanted to take a full hour lunch break because they had errands to run or something like that during that time, I guess if that's the arrangement they make with their head of where the department they work in, I guess seems to me they could do that. If other people would rather take a 15-minute break, and I used to do that all the time. I would, maybe eat something around 10:30, and then, take a half an hour break to go, do something if I needed to do. And then, around 1:30, 2 o'clock or something, I'd take another 15-minute break. And that's just how I did things once upon a time in a job I had. And I kind of like the idea that there's some flexibility for those employees that want it. That's just where my take on it. I hate to be so inflexible and hold people specifically to an hour break and I agree with Melanie to some degree that that we depending on what you're doing in this town, if you work 5, 6, 7 hours or whatever, you really need to take a break. If you're sitting at a desk to stretch your legs, if you're standing at the transfer station for hours and hours to sit down. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. So I'd be in favor of that if it could be set that way. But that's my take.
Well, I like flexibility if it's manageable and doesn't drive everybody nuts. I prefer that. I think that, well, I guess that's sort of my take on it. I also think that practice versus policy, I prefer that policies reflect what the actual practice is. And I think that not everybody's the same. I think, I often don't take a lunch break, but I'll take a break in the morning and I'll take a break in the afternoon. But I just,
I know, I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, I feel like we're all sort of on the same page.
Yeah.
And that we do feel like it's important that every employee in the town of Belgrade feel like we value them enough to say, we want you to take a mental break from your job for at least a half an hour a day. So the half hour to the hour, and I understand, I mean, Belgrade, I don't ever leave work to do an errand. Once in a while, I don't say, I shouldn't say never, but I might run to Walgreens and then run back because it's 5 minutes away. So, and that's just the nature of it. But when you sign on, you are told that you are expected to take a half an hour break at some point in time during the day. And you're to clock out and you're to clock back in. You can sit at your desk and play on Facebook if you want. But I mean, that's part of the hiring process for everyone. So
there's another piece that sort of enters into my thinking, and that is that some jobs can't always offer a really high wage in order to retain employees, but they can offer them, I don't want to sound corny, but they can offer them a piece of humanity, which means that they can work schedules to suit their needs a little bit more. And as Ernie says, this is not a huge organization. And maybe that's something that we need to consider as we're doing, employee kind of work, that this becomes a really nice place to work and it's a really good place to work and all that sort of thing. And so people are willing to not go for higher paying jobs elsewhere.
I tell you what,
Retention, I guess is the word.
yeah, it pains me to say this, but I think Rick Dameron had a good idea.
Oh my God.
The day on the calendar.
Oh, wait a minute.
Wait a minute, could you say that one more time? We're in public meeting.
Yeah, this is being recorded, Rick, so I'll send you a clip. So, but why don't you guys let me take this back to the employees, at least this portion of it. I mean, we can talk about other portions of the policy, but why don't you let me take this back to the employees and find out what their preferences are. And if there are some people who don't want to take a lunch break, I'll come back, or maybe I'll have them come back and tell you why that is. If we have some people who are insistent that they want a 1 hour break, but we have other people who want to take a 30-minute break, then maybe we can build that flexibility into the policy. But why don't you let me, as Rick suggested, query the staff on this.
Yep, good idea.
Dan, did you have something you wanted to weigh in on with it?
No, I was just gonna let you know what the actual statute says. It basically says, employees are permitted to work no more than 6 consecutive hours at one time unless the employee is given the opportunity. Doesn't mean they have to take a break. It says
Right.
the opportunity to take 30 minutes consecutive rest. Unless the job has to do with collective bargaining. So a union, if it's unionized, they can come up with whatever they want, negotiated. Or the written employer agreement provides otherwise, and the employee to the employee and is defined in section 663 of the statute. So basically, each department could have a different lunch break set up depending on what the department does. Because there's also a section at the bottom talks about the nature of work. If it allows an employee, if your nature of work allows an employee to have basically take frequent paid breaks. So if you've got 5 minutes between something that's going on and you're basically on the clock, but you're not doing anything, it's considered a paid break. You know, sometimes jumping in the truck and driving down the road a little bit, a lot of companies consider that a paid break because you're not doing the physical work that you were doing. You just move one place to another. So there's a lot of different loopholes in it. So it's just a matter of figuring out how you're going to address it. But every job's going to use a different type of a break system.
Well, and you can't have them all, everybody can't be taking a lunch break from 12 to 12:30.
Right.
Because what the practice was in the past was that we closed the town office
Yeah. And then at one point,
for
we
a half an
staggered.
hour, and then
And then at
people
one
can-
point, we staggered.
right, we staggered them. So we've tried it a couple of different ways. But the one thing that we've stuck to is that it is important that folks get to take a break.
Mhm.
One of the things at the transfer station where they used to take a break, if you all recall, was that condemned trailer. So
Mhm.
we had a condemned trailer. It was hauled to the transfer station for disposal. We instead seemed to think it was a fabulous idea to turn it into a break room. So we did, and we had them take their breaks in an unsafe location. But we've wisened up. We got smarter over the years and tried to provide. That was one of the things with the revamping of the transfer station a number of years ago, is to make sure that there was a spot that they could go to get away from their job area and actually take a break.
Well, the other thing we might want to consider doing, you know, depending on what Anthony comes back with from the employees, is the section of the employee guidelines that says meals and rest periods. You may just want to make a note there that says, see job description for that particular department. And then you could outline the breaks specifically tailored to which department it is and which type of job it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's tricky to make something blanket, but
Yeah,
there's
it's almost
this other part
impossible.
of me
You've got
that,
office workers and you've got people out there doing
right.
mowing, or, you know, it's just two different types of jobs.
Well, and that's when we had, the folks who were doing the out and about thought it was a hindrance to use the time clock, and others thought that it was being unfair because they were having to punch in and punch out. So we either have to have one policy that's reflective across the board, and it doesn't necessarily, I don't feel like entirely it has to have employee input, because these are employee guidelines that are set by the employer. So it is in their best interest for us to, even if they say, I don't want to take a break, we want you to have a break. That's important. So, about how we can accomplish that, remains to be seen. I do like Dan's idea with the cross sectioning, and that may be how we have to spell it out is, per department. Did anybody have anything about the other bullet points?
It's been so long, I forgot what they were.
The end of the maximum 40 hours a week of accrued comp time. And once again, that's an area where, depending on what you do for a job in the town, who could accrue comp time, who can accrue comp time, and why,
So everybody can accrue comp time other than the town manager. He is the only salaried employee.
Right, but then we have what's unrealistic for a plow dryer or typically our recreation director.
Yeah. So, if we have a month straight of blizzards, then it's very likely that, Chris is going to rack up more than 40 hours of comp time over the course of a year. And so, again, I don't think anyone's milking the clock for comp time. But I do think that having that sort of limit in there may not make good sense for some jobs. And in my mind, the two jobs that came to mind were a plow driver or facility maintenance director and our recreation director, depending upon the programming that they had going on. Although I could also potentially see that being the case with, our two full-time firefighters. If they have to if they're on the scene of a fire for an extended amount of time, and they have a couple of those over the course of a year, they may end up with more than 40 hours of accrued comp time over the course of a year.
Hmm.
So I
There's
think
a
it's, I
reason,
think it's,
Anthony, though. I feel like there's a reason that the 40-hour cap was set.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't have the institutional memory to speak to that.
Well, I think it was set that way because, again, say you have the plow driver that ends up with 3 weeks worth of comp time and decides to take them, who are you gonna get to cover for them?
Right.
You know, once you get to a certain point, you can't find somebody to cover for them. So they're only allowed so much comp time because we don't want them to take any more time off than that.
And I agree with you. I think my concern, Dan, is that
I'll
it
get you,
was
Bruce.
a maximum of 40 hours of accrued comp time per year.
Hmm.
And so, 8 hours here, 8 hours there, and all of a sudden, and then what? So then we have a plow driver who, when they hit 40 hours, we have to say, stop plowing.
Well, and I have to say, quite honestly, we don't have a plow truck driver in Belgrade that's their job the whole time during a storm. We have a facilities maintenance person and their job during a snowstorm is to clear certain areas a certain number of times per day. They're not responsible for clearing the roads. So there would be no reason for that person to say, start work at 4 o'clock in the morning and not finish until 8 o'clock at night. And if so, then there's another reason that they're doing that, because that's not their job.
And I agree. I don't think that if memory serves me correctly last year, I don't think Chris was plowing in the middle of the night last year, although he is mindful that, we have to be able to get fire trucks and rescue truck out of our fire stations. And I'm told that the North Belgrade station in particular can be a little dicey pulling out of there if there's snow or ice on the driveway. Is that true, Rick?
It usually gets taken care of if there's any snow there.
Okay. Does that mean that you're doing it?
He does it most of the time, but once in a while. If I go by there in the middle of the night and it's a lot of snow there, which it can, I knock it out and we all do. Any of us guys plowing.
My biggest thing on it, if you're gonna limit it to 40 hours, then you're gonna have to pay overtime. I
Yeah.
mean, this is why we've lost so many facility maintenance people, is because they can't use their comp time. They only accumulate 40 hours, and then next thing you know, they get accumulated 40 hours. They ain't got time to take time off because they got this to do, that to do, burials and this and that. So if you're gonna limit it, then fine, limit it to 40 hours, and then anything after 40 hours, you pay the time and a half. That's the only way I see you can do this. This has been my argument for years on this. I've argued this and argued this year after year. I mean, I'm sure Ricky and Melanie and Dan can, vouch. I've argued this for multiple years.
You've argued so many things I've forgotten.
No, I agree with Bruce, and I think with comp time, if you get towards the end of the year and the person hasn't been able to use their comp time, we should be paying them that at the end of the year. And then
I think so too.
you start over with accumulating up to 40 hours again.
Yep.
We try to save the money and get them to take the time off if they can, and sometimes they can, and sometimes they're just not going to be able to.
Yeah. And we manage that, I think, actually pretty well, Dan, because we don't let anyone accumulate a whole lot of time before we're not saying, okay, hey, it's time. You need to be looking for opportunities to take some comp time.
Mhm.
And people are have been very agreeable to that. So I think Bruce does offer a potential solution. We just have to be aware that does come with a direct financial cost. Comp time is an indirect cost. Overtime is a direct cost.
Well, and I think what we need when we're preparing the budget and considering any sort of a change here is we need to see per department, what's the comp time look like over the last 2 years, so that we have a fairly decent idea of what we would budget for if we were considering time and a half, because that would clearly change what we're budgeting per department.
Yeah, and I can't promise you that we have that data for the last 2 years.
But I don't think you're gonna find it's a really substantial amount of money that's gonna get paid out. You know, if
No.
you're talking $2,000 or $3,000 in a year, I mean, I'd be surprised.
Yeah. So and so again, this isn't going to impact anyone who works in the town office or the library, as far as I can tell. I think this is only going to touch, realistically, only 2 jobs.
And why would it affect the recreation director so much?
Because there are times where there are events on the weekends where she has to go and either, be there when the events are going on, or she's running the event or whatever. And during the summertime, like for instance, this coming summer, we are hoping to have a craft fair once a month. Well, assuming that we have our summer camp program once a month, then that means that there'll be at least 1 week over the course of a year that she's working 6 days in that week. Now she may look for opportunities to take time off during that week, but I just think that there is an opportunity when you talk about events like daddy-daughter date night, or the craft fairs, or some of the other events that we do, or when we have rentals and she, feels like she needs to be there for a rental, that you could potentially have 40 hours or more over the course of an entire year.
Okay, it used to seem be like we had a different handle on that. It seemed like maybe there was different delegation.
And I'm not suggesting, and I don't think it's a problem. I just think that the policy, doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of a couple of jobs.
But again, like I said, even if we had to pay the overtime, 40 hours times, say, just a ballpark number, $20 an hour, you're talking $800. So if we have 4 or 5 employees, or 4 or 5 weeks that 2 or 3 employees have it, I mean, you're not talking a ton of money.
Yeah. So if that's y'all, and obviously we don't have to make a decision tonight, because it sounds like we want to ask the employees about some things, but I would encourage you guys to think about that. If that's something that you feel like we should just keep the 40-hour cap, and beyond 40 hours, someone gets paid overtime, then we can do that.
Remind me again, Anthony, what's the accrued vacation time? Like, how many hours do you have to work before you start accruing?
Well, it depends upon, whether you've worked more than 5 years or less than 5 years, but you accrue 8 hours per month.
Okay. So, and
that's for someone who has not worked more than 5 years for the town.
so essentially, so 8 hours for every 160 hours worked? Is that how we would?
Yes,
Okay, so like somebody part-time would not be, somebody working part-time doesn't accrue vacation time, correct?
they do, but at a lesser rate.
At a lesser rate, okay.
So they would be accruing vacation time at, well, it depends if they're a 20-hour a week employee or a 32-hour a week employee. But if they're a 20-hour a week employee, they'd be accruing 4 hours per month.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I'm all in favor for setting a probationary period. Now, vacation and sick time, are those 2 totally different things, or do we?
Yes, ma'am. So I did ask the staff about this last year. I was interested in going to a PTO system versus vacation time and sick time, but the employees were not supportive of that at all. And so that again, that wasn't a hill I was ready to fight and die on.
So why would that be? Because paid time off and vacation time, I mean, we all know some folks who use their sick time like vacation time.
Correct.
So just a straight paid time off does seem to make more sense.
Well, but my proposal would be, because I agree, I think there are some people who use their sick time very liberally and others who never use their sick time. And so having worked in a PTO system in the past and I had very little sick time, I rather enjoy that because it just meant more vacation time for me over the course of a year. But I was proposing that you would accrue PTO at a lesser rate than you would your combined vacation and sick time, as a way of sort of limiting people from, just taking sick time just because they had it.
Because it was 85 degrees out and was going to be a nice day.
But
Hmm.
most of the,
Yeah, because then you have those other kind of gray areas where at a certain point in time, do you have to provide a doctor's note to,
yeah,
back up the fact that you've now taken 10 days of sick time. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yes.
So leave that piece alone essentially, and just, are we comfortable with the 6 month? Like you have to work here for 6 consecutive months before you are allowed to use any vacation time that you've
Yeah,
accumulated.
that seems perfectly reasonable to me. It seems like it's been that way every place I've been.
And
If
when are
you,
you
I remember one time I took a job just before I got married the first time, and and I had a honeymoon planned or something, and I just made that clear right from the get go that I needed a week off, in the first month or two of when I started, and I took it without pay. I mean, at that time, so it just makes sense, I think, to accrue. It's almost like when you get a bonus or something, a sign-on bonus, you don't get it up front. You get it after a certain amount of time. Same idea.
So when an employee gets done with the town, Anthony, say they have 20 hours of accrued vacation time and they've been here for 6 months, or they've been here 5 months. Do we pay them for that accrued vacation time?
Shouldn't be.
Because
unless they've been
no,
here
no. So what I am proposing here is accrued vacation time is relinquished if an employee fails to successfully complete their probationary period.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, so well, and what makes me think of it is when I worked in the doctor's office, we had someone apply for a job. She was given a job, and the way the employee guidelines stated was, once you were employed, you were entitled to 1 week's vacation. She didn't show up once, and they had to pay her for a full 40-hour work week. So we don't want to be in that pickle. That's why I was asking. Like, you could potentially just not show up and still get paid. But if you complete the 6 months and then quit, would we pay them out for that vacation time?
I would say yes.
I think legally you have to. Once they've been through the probationary period, it's time that belongs to them.
Okay.
I mean, you can put stipulations too, though, when it comes to vacation time, though, is you have to use it within the calendar year or you do lose it. Many companies are like that.
Yeah, so we do have that within the policy. You can only accrue so much vacation time before it will not carry over into the next year. I believe it's 240 hours.
I know the company I work for, I can only carry over 1 week's vacation, and it has to be used within the first quarter of the next year.
Mm.
Or you lose it.
Okay.
And if somebody gets done, they're not entitled to any paid sick time that's accrued.
That's correct.
Most places are like that.
That's
Right.
correct.
Which might be a problem if we do the paid time off and it's
It could be, but they'd be accruing, well, people who are honestly sick would actually be taking their paid time off for that reason.
Right. All right, so I think we got a little tweaking to do with it. Does anybody else have anything else that jumped out at them that,
Yeah, the only thing I saw is back up the expenses. We're using the state rate for mileage, but we're not using the state rate for lunches and overnight stays. I know you've tweaked those, and I really think we ought to stick to the state rates on everything if we're going to use the state rates.
Oh, okay.
And you can go to the state and find out what they're reimbursing in state and out of state. There'll be two.
Okay. I think that's very reasonable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to ask the staff, how about this, Ricky? What if I ask them about their opinion on courtesy interviews? If that's something that regardless of the position, if they apply for, regardless of whether or not they're deemed to be qualified or not, do they want an interview?
I think they should look at the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I'll present the whole thing, definitely.
And
But I'm going to call special attention to that. Ask them about how they want to take their lunch breaks. I'll contact the Maine Department of Labor about the physical exams. And then, yeah, I think, we can keep the 40-hour max on accrued comp time per year and then pay overtime after that.
I think we got a good start on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I had just a quick thought about that courtesy interview thing, which was, I've been on some of these committees that have interviewed people, and I myself have applied for your position at one time, many, many, many years ago, when, we had a guy that, got hauled out of the town office in handcuffs. I thought, well, I can do that job. So I was in between gigs and I threw an application in for the heck of it. But, clearly I wasn't qualified enough out of the pool of applicants. And I wasn't granted an interview, and I didn't take it as any sort of slight or anything like that. It just, I just wanted to do something for the town if the town really needed somebody like me to do something for the town. So, I think if somebody has, Nick is a good example of somebody who started out at the transfer station and now is the town treasurer. And that's a fantastic story. And, so I think when we should encourage town employees to apply for positions, and you never know if they may be the most qualified person that applies.
or they may be the person that so wants that position that they're willing to do the training,
Sure.
get them
Yeah.
fully qualified for that
Yeah.
position.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah. I just think, when everybody should be encouraged to apply, and you sort through those applications, and if that person, seems to have at least some of the basic qualities to do the position that being interviewed for, bring them in. But if they're, woefully unqualified, or then, you just don't add them into the list simply because they live in town or are a town employee. It seems to me that just. So.
Now, I have to ask, just as a point, Katie Farron, I think I've heard several times from various people in town that she was probably one of the best town managers that town of Belgrade's ever had. And if I recall, Katie did not have a ton of experience being a town manager prior to taking that position. But what she had was a love of Belgrade. She had good communication skills. She had an open door policy. And everybody that she talked to in Belgrade felt like she heard what they were saying, that she had their best interests at heart. And, so that's one of those cases where somebody on paper may not look like the perfect candidate, but really turned out to be one of the best town managers. And years later, people still talk about how fabulous she was as a town manager.
She had a lot of management skills, and that's what we was looking
Right.
for, skills.
So we probably want to look at that one too. But I do feel like, and I don't know if it's even a policy in town, it used to be, I think, an unwritten policy, and it seemed like the right thing to do was that if you don't grant someone an interview, that you send them a letter thanking them for their application and that you've chosen not to interview them at this time. Because I've heard from several people that they don't know how long they should wait before they follow up with the town and ask whether or not they're being considered, or without being a bother. They don't want to call too many times. And it just seems like if somebody takes the time to send us an application, that they deserve the same courtesy that we send them a response.
I think that's a good point.
So, and I don't know if it's a written policy somewhere, but if it isn't, it should be. So if we have to legislate doing the right thing.
Yeah, I don't think, I think that's just a good practice. I don't know that we need to put it into a policy, but I think that's a good practice, and we will definitely do that moving forward.
Well, and I think it's a good practice, but then what happens is between administrations, it gets lost. And then that's where you hear people like, I didn't know how long to wait, So just my 2 cents on that one. So are we done discussing this one for tonight? We're ready to move on to a holiday schedule.
Yes.
All right, next item on the agenda is consideration of holiday hours. So in years past, we've closed the town. Oh, actually, what I'll do is I will take a motion to open this agenda item. Ricky's got it.
Second,
Second, yeah.
Dan seconded. All right, it's now open for discussion. So the practice in the past has been to close the town office on Christmas Eve at noon time. And that would fall on a Thursday this year. And doing the same on New Year's Eve. Now, there's something that we normally have to do to close the books up. And we normally
Correct.
close the town office, but then the staff was still working. Does that need
Yes.
to be New Year's Eve, or can that be?
Yeah. So the books need to be closed out on the last day of the fiscal year, which for us is December 31st. And so you can't close out your financial transactions as you're still conducting financial transactions. And so what we're proposing is to, shut down the town office at noon on New Year's Eve. And it's going to take the staff a few hours, 2 or 3 hours to close out the books for the year. And so that's why we're asking to do that. It's not because we're ready to get our New Year's Eve on.
No, and that's what I was trying to figure out, because I think what we normally do is post a notice on the town office door.
Oh, yes, we would publicize it well in advance that we're going to be closing at noon on this day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I was just trying to wrap my head around. I was like, I know that we have to do this a certain way. And so is everybody okay with that? Do we do it in one? Why don't we take it in 2 separate? Because it's 2 totally different days. And doesn't affect anything, correct? Because Christmas Day is on Friday. So is the transfer station going to continue to be open the day after Christmas?
Correct. I asked Kenny about that, and he was insistent that yes, he wanted to be open the day after Christmas. Is a big day for the transfer station.
Okay. And are we recycling wrapping paper this year, or are we throwing it all in the hopper like last year? In the past,
I don't know anything about that, so I'd have to ask about that.
yeah. So a handful of years ago, they'd started recycling the Christmas wrapping paper as long as people took their ribbons and bows out of it. And then a couple of years ago, they were just like, forget it, throw it all in the hopper. Bruce?
as of right now, unless things have changed in the last few weeks, there is no market for that. There's no mixed paper market anymore.
Okay,
But,
So-
like the boxes that Colvin comes in, that people give out, that we can take in, as, that goes in corrugated, but most of your wrapping paper, unfortunately, is gonna, unless things have changed, and I'll check with Ken, but I don't think they have. We just had a meeting the other night, and wasn't overly excited about mixed paper still, so.
okay,
What I
All right.
recall of that, from what I recall of that is, it was so labor intensive to take the bows off, to take the ribbons off, to take the this and that. It was so much tape, all various things that came into play, trying to address that and make it usable. So it made it difficult.
okay. All right, so I will take a motion, actually, I will make a motion that we close town facilities at noon on Thursday, December 24th, 2020.
I'll second that.
All right, is there any further discussion on that one? Seeing none, all those in favor? 4, 1 absent. All right, I'll make a second motion that we close the town office. So we close all town facilities at noon on December 31st, with the exception of the town office, which will close to the public at noon on December 31st, but will stay open for staff until the closing out of the 2020 books for the town are complete. Is there a second for
I'll
that?
second that.
So we're closing all the rest of the town at noon
On the 31st.
on the 31st.
Yeah.
I would think you'd just close the town office to the public and let the town office finish up their work.
Yeah, so the two facilities that would impact would be the library and the rec center.
And fire
And I-
department,
Well, we had
Well, the
done
fire
last
department's
year-
always going to be open,
but you got your new, how's that work with the two full-time positions?
They get the same time off everybody else does.
correct.
Exactly. And how's it fair for the town employees have to work, say, from 12 to 4 o'clock, while everybody else is getting paid from 12 to 4 o'clock off? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Well, and I think we had to tweak something last year, didn't we? And I think the way we did it was that everybody had to work until, it was either 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And one of the things that was going to affect was that the library was normally open until 7 o'clock, but we closed the library earlier on New Year's Eve, so that it was the same across the board. Does anybody else recall that? Because I feel like we had a similar discussion with that last year.
I seem to recall that.
I wasn't on the board last year, so I don't remember.
I don't remember that, but that's fine. We may have.
Because I feel like we had the same discussion, like, well, because I think it was, well, everybody else will just stay open their normal hours and we'll close the town office at noon to the public. But then the library was going to stay open until 7. And then would that be unfair to the folks working in the library if the rest of the staff was able to be done at 5?
So the library is open 4 hours on Fridays. And so, whatever time you guys want to close town facilities, we can just make sure the library is open for 4 hours on that day.
Make it 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, whatever.
I guess I kind of get what Dan was alluding to when he said, you correct me if I didn't read you right, Dan, but I think, what is the purpose for, Christmas Eve is Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve, this year is probably going to be quite a lot different than any other New Year's Eve, or should be. And, you know, if people get out of work at 5 o'clock on New Year's Eve, they can still go celebrate New Year's Eve, and they've got New Year's Day off. So maybe Christmas Eve is wise to close at noon, but maybe just close the town office to the public at noon, and everyone else just go about normal business on New Year's Eve, and maybe that's really all we need to do for New Year's Eve.
Because we're closed New Year's Day.
Yeah,
Friday.
yeah, we're
Friday
closed New Year's
first.
Day anyway, but I don't think we necessarily, you know, I think closing at noon on Christmas Eve is traditionally a gesture that's done, you know, for to ease the preparations for Christmas Day for various people if they're, you know, wrapping all their gifts on Christmas Eve, like I do, or you know, I think if you know, if I don't know if I read Dan right, but it seems to me that maybe is a wise idea just to leave it Christmas Eve at noon and close the town office at noon, so the town office can reconcile the books and so forth for the end of the year.
Well, and I feel like that's how we ended this last year, because I feel like we had the same conversation, even though you weren't here, Dan, like, well,
No,
New Year's Eve isn't the holiday. New Year's
Yeah,
Day
I
isn't
think
the
that's how
holiday.
it went.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I remember it
So I
going.
think you tried this last year too, Anthony, and we were like, ixnay.
Yeah. So let's, you know, that would be what I'd be in favor of, I think.
I'd take and alter the library hours though, so that they're open a little earlier and close, you know, 4 or 5, whatever time everything else is closing. Because you don't have people going to the library that late on New Year's Eve.
Correct.
Good plan.
And what hours are they usually open on Friday?
2 to 6.
Well, Friday is the day off. We're talking
Right.
Thursday.
So Friday, they
Oh,
would,
Thursday, yeah. So Thursday they're open 10 to 7. Excuse me.
Okay, so maybe that wants to be altered. Could be.
so do we close at 4 or close at 5 on New Year's Eve? I mean, Lord knows it's dark at 4. So,
I mean, I don't have a problem with closing everybody by 4 on New Year's Eve if you want to get out an hour early, but it's nice to have a little bit of benefit. And then have the library either open earlier that day or one of the other days that week, expand their hours a little bit.
Yep.
or simply that they notice publicly that the library is going to close at 5 o'clock on New Year's Eve, period. You know, not open any earlier, just we're going to close at 5 o'clock.
I'm just trying to keep from other employees going, how come they're getting 3 or 4 hours paid extra?
That's true.
Yeah.
I suppose we could offer them.
Yeah. I will ask the library to be open the same number of hours on Thursday, on New Year's Eve, that it always is on Thursday, which is 8.
That means open at like 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. So
That'd be fine.
maybe they can do some end of year cleaning in there. And,
Like, kids will be out of school. If people want to, most people will be on, a lot of people will be on vacation. If they want to run by the library and pick up a book, we'll be open.
All right, so was there a second on my earlier motion?
No.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to rescind that one. So there wasn't a second on it anyway, and I will make a new motion that states that the town office will be open to the public from 8 to noon on New Year's Eve, closed to the public after noon time, and the staff will stay until 4 o'clock to give them a chance to close out the end of the year books. All other town facilities will close at 4 p.m. on New Year's Eve. And the library will be open the usual number of hours, so they'll stagger their hours so that they can still be out at 4 p.m. Super wordy. Is there a second?
before you do that, if the town office is closing at 4, is that early or is that the normal time?
It's 30 minutes earlier than normal.
Okay. Because it's a say, I don't know if it's the same with all the other facilities.
Well, on a Thursday, we actually stay open until 7, but that's just one person.
That's kind of semantics.
But they might get done at 2, 3 instead of 4. I mean, all depends how long it takes them to
And
close.
we pay them till 4.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anthony, we give you the right to throw people out when you're done.
Okay,
Okay,
And then the library, I give them the extra, decrease the hours by a half hour that day if we're calling them, the town office closing a half hour early.
okay,
So they don't have to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is.
okay.
All right, I'm gonna second that motion that everybody's made, so we can move on.
Yes.
we don't know what it is, but if you can make sense of that alphabet soup,
I
Anthony,
know.
it would be super. Now, is
I
the rec
got it.
center gonna be open on New Year's Eve?
Well, it will now.
Okay, perfect. All right, so there's a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any more discussion? All right, thank goodness. Ricky, what's your pleasure?
Geez, I don't know. Yes.
Ernie?
Yes.
Oh, Dan.
Yes.
All right, 4 yeses, 1 absent. All right, next up on the agenda, we have the the warrant. I'll take a motion to open that agenda item.
So be it.
Second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, the agenda is now open for discussion.
So this is warrant number 157 in the amount of $590,369.13.
All right, I have a couple of things. Page 2. Well, it starts on page 1 to page 2 under Boundtree Medical. Is that Boundtree or Roundtree?
Boundtree.
Okay, I was thinking it was Roundtree for some reason. We have face masks COVID for 189 and then face shields COVID.
Mhm.
So we do the duplicate system there. So that I understand, but then we have sprayer COVID.
Mhm.
What is that?
Sprays the disinfectant.
Where do we spray that?
That I do not know. I assume that they must be spraying down their equipment after, or maybe even their PPE after they have responded to a COVID call.
Bruce? Hang on, Bruce, can you answer that?
Yeah, after every rescue call, we wiped out all the rescue equipment when we're done. So that's what that's what
Weren't we
that's
doing
used
that
for.
before?
Yes, we were, but not as extensive as we are now. I mean, we're doing everything. We're doing the outside of our bags, we do everything.
Okay,
The truck, we do, literally do everything. It's very, very, after a call, we're probably a good half hour, 45 minutes just cleaning.
So
Okay.
these are 32-ounce bottles with sprayers.
so this is just the bottles. This isn't,
Oh, it's got the chemical in it.
Get the chemical in it, all pre-mixed.
okay. And we can't, okay. Okay. I guess I'm just, my brain goes to, is there a way we can mix our own? Is there?
We did for a while, but it's a pain in the neck to try to mix it and get the right mix. And
Then you
what the
have somebody
CDC
complain
recommends.
that it bleached their clothes because they leaned on it.
Yeah.
All right, page 6. All the way down at the bottom, check number 20701. We paid $207 for budget binders. Are
Mhm.
these different than the red ones that we normally reuse that?
The ones that were had been used in the past were literally falling apart. So we bought a whole new set of binders.
Okay. And my question on page 7 under Staples is, we bought sanitizer and paper towels at Staples. Why on earth would we buy our paper towels from them? They've got to be about the most expensive place to buy paper towels.
I can't answer that question. I don't know why we bought from there. We usually buy from WB Mason, so I'm not sure why, unless we were just placing an order. And so while we were on that website, we went ahead and ordered from them. So I'll encourage our staff to make sure that we're purchasing from WB Mason.
Yeah, I mean, just where we can save money. I mean, I wouldn't walk into Staples and ever buy a roll of paper towels. Yeah, unless they're on some screaming clearance deal. But that's all I had on that. Anybody else have anything?
No. The WD Mason down at the bottom there, you've got paper towels on that one too.
Yep.
Page 7, third from the bottom, says paper towel.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did stock up on paper towels for just the cleaning for the cleaning that's going on in the town office right now.
Okay, well, they seem to be cheaper at WB Mason, so let's do those.
Okay.
And that's it. Does anybody else have anything? All right, seeing none. Ricky, what's your pleasure?
I don't think we've had a motion in a second.
No, the only motion to look at it.
That's true. We've motioned it, discussed it. All right, I'll take a motion.
So be it.
All right, is there a second? All right, now Ricky, what's your pleasure?
Yeah,
Oh, let me think about it. Ernie, what's your pleasure?
Yes.
All right, Dan.
Yes,
All right, 4, 1 absent. All right, next up, we have the town manager's report.
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick. We're going to have an appeals board hearing on 2 appeals next week. And one of the things in discussing with our attorneys I've discovered is that in most other communities, appeals of planning board decisions go directly to the Superior Court because they typically end up there anyway. And when the Superior Court looks at the decision, they're not looking at what the appeals board did. They're looking at what the planning board did. So both the attorney who's assisting with the appeals board and the town attorney suggested that we should really amend our ordinance so that the appeals board is dealing with appeals of permits that have been issued administratively, and any permits issued by the planning board should go directly to Superior Court. Now, doing this would actually save the town money because right now we are incurring additional attorney's expenses in this particular case that is certainly going to end up in Superior Court. And once the court gets a hold of that, then they're not going to be looking at what the appeals board did. They're going to be looking at what the planning board did. So I'd like to get your authorization to begin working with the town attorney on amending our ordinances so that planning board appeals go to Superior Court, appeals of administrative permits go to the appeals board. I've talked with both the chairs of the appeals and the planning board. They are both supportive of that move.
So at first blush, that sounds like it makes perfect sense. I can't imagine that Belgrade's the first community to look at it that way. So I would assume that there's a precedent that's been set by another town that in their appeals board and planning board policies that's probably already been addressed. So maybe we can look at the verbiage that's been used. If you don't mind popping something out, maybe on the server, maybe MMA can be of guidance instead of involving the town attorney if there's a model that we can already utilize.
So what I would suggest is that, so the MMA is not going to help us with this because they deal more with broad issues as opposed to specific issues. So they're not going to help us with ordinance language. But what I can do is the attorney who's helping the appeals board actually mentioned another community that he's working with that has an ordinance that he suggested that we change our ordinance to mirror theirs. So I can get that ordinance, craft the language, then run it by the town attorney just to have a legal review of it before bringing it to you guys. I think we always want a legal review of any sort of ordinance language
I
before
think
we
we do
adopt it.
too, but I guess what I'm thinking of is if another town has already done it, then I would bring it before the select board. Let us take a look at it, and then we'll say, yes, we're comfortable with the way this looks right now. Let's run it by the town attorney and make sure that we can move this forward this way, that there's no Ts that need to be crossed.
Yeah. And I'm fine with that. I just think, you know, as I said, I think a legal review makes good sense because we don't have any guarantees that that town, you know, did a proper legal review of its ordinance necessarily.
Well, and that was my suggestion with MMAs. They may not give us legal guidance, but they certainly, they're pretty hip to everybody in the state of Maine, and they can usually direct us to something. You know, I don't know, just something we already pay for that I'm like, if they say, hey, the town of Wilton just did something similar.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with them is they're more versed in state law as opposed to local ordinances. But as I said, the attorney that we're working with the appeals board knows of an ordinance that he thinks would be a good model for us. So I'll get that from him.
Okay.
I had an email exchange with the Department of Transportation last week just about they're starting to craft the basic agreement on our well remediation situation. And they raised two questions. One is, when do we anticipate taking a warrant article regarding the agreement to the voters? I said we would be doing that at town meeting. And, you know, I'm assuming that we're going to do that on the usual date, third Saturday in March, but it won't be a traditional town meeting. It'll be a referendum town meeting like we had back in July. Is that a good assumption to make, or do you guys have something different in mind when it comes to town meeting this year?
I think you're right on the money. I don't know how I can, you know, I've still got a problem with this. I don't know how I can support this with them still dumping salt all over that road.
Well, Rick, now that's going to be a negotiation point. I've already let them know that one of the negotiation points that we're going to want to talk about is salt priority.
Well, and I've literally said that from the get-go. And, you know, literally right out of the gate, first meeting that we had conversation about it was that, and I seem to recall at that same one, what we were told was that what was in the wells was not the same chemical composition of what we were using on the road in that area. And now, a couple of years later,
Hold on, it is.
turns out that's exactly what it is. So not that I want to toot my own horn, but that was one of my things, was that the changes between those years have reflected in this. So that has to be a negotiating point.
Yeah, so that's a negotiating point. But what I'm trying to figure out is we're working on a timetable. So when do they need to have something ready to put before our voters? And right now, I'm assuming that's going to be March 19th in the form of a referendum town meeting.
You're gonna have to have a public hearing on it.
Of course. But
Gonna be-
we're trying to work backwards from whenever the election would be.
I would set it for the town meeting.
I'm sorry, say that again, Dan.
I would set it for the town meeting.
Okay.
You know, and if something happens in the town meeting gets pushed out, we don't have any control over that.
Okay. So we should work under the assumption that that's going to be March 19th, which is the third Saturday in March in 2021. Okay.
Makes sense to me.
Well,
Okay.
and it does me as well. I'm not sure, I guess. Planning on a referendum town meeting. So, and Dan, I guess you two are working on this, so I guess I'm trying to figure out like what's the conversation been? So are we going, is the salt well remediation committee gonna work on an agreement?
No, you and Dan are going to be the negotiators on behalf of the town.
I haven't talked to him since we talked last with our normal salt well meeting. The only thing I've talked to is Anthony asked me about the language and what kind of a thing we were going to put forward to the town. And I suggested basically that we get the authorization from the town to enter into an agreement basically in the best interest of the town. I mean,
Right.
we can't have an actual agreement because there's gonna be something that's gonna have to be tweaked and would have to go back to the town.
Yeah, so that was essentially was the next question. Is the DOT wanted to know whether or not we needed to have a completed agreement in hand for that vote, or if it was, as Dan said, to the warrant article would be to authorize the select board to enter into an agreement with the DOT. When Dan and I chatted, I thought he sort of split the baby there in a way that made a good sense, in that I think we should push to have that completed agreement so we have something that we can show the voters, but also have the ballot language say that if amendments are needed, that we're asking the voters to authorize the select board to enter into an agreement. So looking for your thoughts on that.
My personal thing, I think that's gonna be too much for them to chew at one time. I think we need to come in with, like Dan said to begin with, a look at it, proposal what's gonna happen, but not the full-blown thing. I don't see how we can.
I feel like how do I say this in the best way? I feel like we have to have a warrant article to present to the voters in March. We have to have something. We have to have a time frame on how we're moving forward, how we're going to pay for it. We have to figure out the state's going to pay for it and they will come. We have to, Belgrade side has got to figure out how we're going to budget for this, because it's not going to be a no cost to us for next year. And that's going to be tricky for us to figure that out in the budget process. How much do we budget for this for the upcoming year?
So I've got a couple of ideas for that. What you may have seen in the proposed budget is I'm proposing that we transfer $100,000 from our undesignated fund to our well remediation fund to cover cost. Not just necessarily this year, but for years moving forward as well, capital cost. One of the other things that we'll talk about at the budget workshop on Sunday is I learned of a peer who, as part of his town's warrant articles this past year, had a warrant article that, because they were worried about their revenue situation, allowed them to use a certain percentage of the undesignated fund if necessary. And so I think, something like that could be a possibility for ensuring that we have the funds available to deal with whatever costs we might see in the coming year. And at this point, Melanie, I'm not anticipating those are going to be a lot of costs, because they're going to build it and we're going to be responsible for the operation of it. It may or may not be operational in 2021. It might not be until 2022 before it's operational. And even then, you were privy to the conversation with the Maine Rural Water Association that those annual costs are not going to be significant. It's just going to be making sure that we have a capital account available to deal with any sort of infrastructure issues that may arise. But for the first year, the system will be under warranty.
Right, but there's two parts to this agreement. And one is going to be the part where we sign on for a public water supply with a limitation of this many people. And the second part of that, and it's either two warrant articles or it has to be coupled into one, is remediation. Because we have an obligation to provide the potable water, but we also have an obligation to remedy some of
Oh, right.
some of what
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
So
Yeah.
there's two different pieces to that, and it may have to be a two warrant article piece unless is DOT thinking that the agreement is going to encompass both parts of it? Because I feel like they have experience in setting up a public water supply. We don't. So we are, whatever help we can have with that, and moving forward where they've created a public water supply with other communities, how have they done it with their warrant articles?
Yeah, and I'm not certain that DOT has done this before. I mean, DEP certainly has, but it's been different sort of circumstances where the town hasn't been liable for any of the cost necessarily.
Didn't they set something up? And yeah, DOT said that they'd set another one up.
Oh, they had, okay.
Yeah, but it didn't have as many participants.
But again, as part of the budget that we'll be discussing on Sunday, I'm proposing $100,000 from the undesignated fund into the well remediation fund, and we may want to do something more than that.
All right, Bruce.
The one thing that you will have yearly expenses is that water, I'm guarantee, is going to have to be some sort of treatment. It's going to either have to be chlorinated. It's going to, most water systems, public water systems have to be chlorinated. So you are going to have expenses right from day one. And, and the biggest thing is I haven't been able to wrap around it. And of course, I haven't seen any engineering on it, but, you're going to have to build a tank farm, and, that's going to be, that takes maintenance, and then who's, have we talked to any companies or any entities out there that's going to come in and maintain this? Are we going to meter it? I mean, there's a lot of questions that the voters are going to ask. And like Ricky said, I think if you put a lot of this all in one vote, I think it's going to fail. And what are we going to do if it does fail?
So, yes, to answer your question, Bruce, yes, we've talked to the Maine Rural Water Association about potentially managing the system for us. They're agreeable to that. And again, this is why I'm raising the question is, what do you guys want out of a warrant article? Do you want a completed agreement that we can show voters, or do you want something that just authorizes the select board to execute an agreement with the DOT?
I think that if we attempt to put an entire agreement in a warrant article, it's going to be pages.
Oh, well, I mean, I would anticipate, Melanie, I don't think we would put the entire warrant article or the entire agreement in the warrant article. I think we would word it like we would an ordinance, a warrant article in an ordinance, and then we would make that agreement available to people in various forms, posting it, putting it on our website, linking to it from our social media, including it in the town report, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the minute it's written up, the minute it's on paper, even if it's a draft, it's still public record.
Correct.
So.
And then if we have a public hearing, then you can explain to people what the whole agreement is.
Yeah.
But and maybe that's the best analogy. I mean, I view this a little bit like how we pass an ordinance. We make the full copy of the ordinance available to anyone who wants to access it. And then we have a condensed warrant article on the warrant.
Yeah, so I don't know, do we think that in 3 months' time, we're going to have a completed agreement with DOT?
I think that if that's what we want, we need to let them know now. And I think it gives them some incentive to get her done.
Well, and I think if nothing else, if we, because you have the school budget referendum as well, that usually takes
It's in
place
June.
June. which is where, I mean, I don't want for us to rush something either and try to get it done in 2.5 months' time.
I think we don't have to be rushed, but I think if we create a sense of urgency, maybe we'll get it done more expediently. And, you guys won't sign off on it until you're ready.
I would say if DOT can have an agreement that we can have reviewed by the select board and the town attorney prior to anything moving forward, if they can have that for March. I mean, they're not going to be reinventing the wheel because they've created these agreements previously.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can have something to us that we can review, what we can give them is our word that we'll do our best to address it with the annual town meeting, knowing that if stuff comes up at public hearing, if there are things that need to be tweaked, that we may not be able to do anything with it until June.
Okay.
We have something ready for the voters to review and discuss, at least for town meeting. Dan, you're pursing your lips. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're better off having them come up with the best they can that we can review, but not tell them we're gonna have to wait until June. I still think we need to put a warrant article out authorizing the select board to do the negotiating and sign the thing. Because that way, if we have to change it for a month or two, if it takes us a month or two, it takes us a month or two. But I mean, that's what the select board's elected for, is to make the hard decisions. As long as the people know what we're doing it for, why, because we've got to do this water system. It's either that or buy these properties. I would say write the warrant article that way, and we have something as close to done as possible for town meeting so that people can see what it is. And if we have to go in and make minor changes, we have to make some minor negotiated changes.
Right, well, that's what I was saying, is if DOT can have something ready for us for March, that we give them.
Yeah, I just don't want to have to wait until to June to go back to the voters again.
Right.
I'd like to have the vote in the town meeting that says we're authorized to do this once we get it to where we want it.
All right, so let's tell them March.
Okay, I'm gonna tell them March. I'm gonna tell them we'd like to have a completed agreement.
We actually would have to have it before March, because if we have
Yes.
a public hearing on it, it has to be so many days before the vote.
And if we're gonna have a referendum town meeting, what I might propose is let Mary and I come back to you at the next meeting and lay out the details of how we would pull that off. In other words, when would we have the absentee voting? When would we have the public hearings? Because we've already got the moorings ordinance, for instance, is going to be on the town warrant. So when would we have the public hearings? When would we have the actual vote? Usually the ballot vote occurs on a Friday, but to me, it seems like it makes sense to have all the voting on a Saturday, just to make it easier for voters, since we wouldn't have the traditional town meeting. So
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to do a bunch of contingencies. We'll plan for the worst, but there's
Yes.
a lot of things that are gonna change this spring from where I've been for the last 3 days. These Zoom meetings for select board meetings expire this spring. And unless they call the legislature back and start getting some stuff done, we'll be having to meet in person.
Yeah. So anyway, but does that sound good to you? Just let us bring you some details about how we would propose to pull off a referendum town meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That does. All right.
And then I just had one other thing I wanted to mention, and this relates to the Lakes Committee. And I spoke earlier this week with Mike Garino, who's the chair of the Friends of Messalonsky. And as I said, they're going to be meeting here very shortly to pick someone that they would put forth as the potential representative on the Lakes Committee. And he asked whether or not that person needed to be a town resident versus someone who is just a member of Friends of Messalonsky. I think I could argue both sides. Having someone affiliated with the town would be great. But also if we had someone from another town, then maybe that helps us to try to have some have that person be a liaison to be with that town in order to have some consistency of regulation on the Belgrades. But those are y'all's decisions. So I wanted to ask you about it so that I could relay that information to Mike.
Matter to me. It seems though somebody that is on that committee, has an interest in the lakes and, whether they're a property owner on the water or in the town, I guess it doesn't necessarily matter so much. Ideally, a lake owner, a lakefront owner is, has sort of skin in the game, so to speak. But on the other hand, we all do because we live in the lakes, so area. It's my 2 cents.
So is it whether they have to live on the lake or if they have to be a Belgrade resident?
Whether or not they're a Belgrade resident.
So, and I think that the guidelines for committees and boards in Belgrade does state that you have to be a Belgrade resident. Or at least a part-time resident, because we do have spots open for seasonal residents.
Mhm.
But I'm pretty sure that the guidelines say that you have to be a Belgrade resident.
Is that what the lakes, this new lakes committee is that set up the same way, or is it meant to?
The charter says a member from each of the lake associations, 1 seasonal resident, and then 3 members at large appointed by the select board.
Well, the lakes associations are made up of people from various lakes in various towns that, sort of join us. It would seem like if they're going to represent that lake association, they don't necessarily have to represent this town. So it would have some sort of consistency similar to the dams committee in that there's people from other towns that we share the dams with. No?
Well, yeah, because like the Snow Pond Association are all of the folks from that committee from Belgrade, because Snow Pond or Messalonsky Lake is not just.
No,
Belgrade.
so they have members from Belgrade, Sydney, Oakland.
Yeah, so it does seem like if they're already on that, oh, I don't know, what do you guys think?
Well, like there's a representative from the Seven Lakes Alliance that would be part of that too. Is that correct?
No, we didn't include the Seven Lakes Alliance.
Oh, okay.
It was the BLA, Friends of Messalonsky, McGraw Salmon.
Okay. Well, like as Melanie said, those, or the Oakland, Sydney, Belgrade are part of those. Rome, are part of the join those lakes that we share. So if they're representing a lakes committee, and it seems, I don't know, but it all depends if it's in the charter of the committee to allow that versus the library committee, or where you have to be a Belgrade transfer station committee, the other committees in town where you have to be a Belgrade resident.
Well, and I guess my other concern would be if the Lakes Committee brings a recommendation before the Board of Select Persons in Belgrade, then we would be acting on that on Belgrade's behalf. But the agreement with other towns, say it's a Rome resident, there's no sway there, there's no sway, there's no say. So them being a liaison, I don't know if that's realistic, if that supersedes the other committees. Bruce, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they're like any other committee. All decisions, basically go through you guys as select board and the town as the voting body. So, I mean, I guess, yes, you guys get the decision on it, but I don't see where it really makes much of a difference where you guys are the ones that are gonna make the decisions on anything that's brought to you guys and then send it to the voters.
I agree. Next.
I know, I'm still just a little stumped. I'm trying to think about all the logistics of it and if it would be beneficial to have someone from another town on that committee.
Well, and I think, if it's someone from that group and they have someone who's, let's say they live in Sydney, they're a member of Friends of Messalonski, they're very engaged in that group. They care a lot about that lake, more so than any other, maybe any of the Belgrade residents who would be a part of that group, then, we may be missing out on someone who brings some energy and some engagement to that group. So I think it's just how you guys want to slice it.
Well, and I think, Anthony, probably the best thing to do is pull up what we have for a policy for committees in town. Because I think that is the basis of them, is that you have to be a resident of the town of Belgrade. And if this committee is a town of Belgrade committee, standing committee, then it has to follow the same guidelines unless we create a policy that exempts them.
Okay,
Otherwise,
so
they'll be under that
so I'll look for that policy. And again, I want to get back to Mike on this so that they can make a decision within their group. If there is no such policy, then what am I to do?
If there is no policy that binds them to somebody being a resident of the town of Belgrade.
Yeah.
But there is a policy.
Oh, so you're saying the policy does exist?
There is a policy that states in order to be on a committee in the town of Belgrade that you have to be a resident of the town of Belgrade. It was tweaked a handful of years back to allow seasonal residents to be able to fill one position on certain committees. Some of them were non-voting, but there were parameters. It was tweaked a handful of years ago.
Okay, so what you're telling me is they need to choose a Belgrade resident.
I would say if that policy is in existence, which I'm 99% sure it is, then it has to be a Belgrade resident, at least for this time around.
Okay. I'm done.
Question on the Beckett House. I was actually going to stop in and see if we were doing them again this year.
We are, in order to keep people out of stores, and we talked with Beckett House about this, and they were agreeable to this. They are seeking gift cards instead this year, for which they can then take and sit down with their residents and order gifts from Target, Walmart, Amazon, Olympia Sports. So right now, I've tasked our recreation director with making little ornaments for the tree that state that, and so we'll be soliciting those donations very, very shortly.
And then I have to say that I'm a little bit bummed because every year I take something from that tree, and it seems like every year the boys want Red Sox gear. So I've been buying Red Sox gear, anticipating.
Well, if you
House, I was like,
if you want to donate some Red Sox gear, I'm sure they'd be happy to have it.
I was like, well, I'm getting my dad Red Sox mask. I'll get them for the kids too. So things like that. So I'm like, oh man, my best laid plans.
Mm.
All right. Anybody else have anything tonight?
No, but I'd make a motion, we adjourn.
You would?
Yes,
Amen.
would.
I'll second that.
All right. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All right, 4-0 against. Have a good night, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Night, y'all.
Thank you,
I had
Bruce.
to laugh with the wave goodbye.
Thank-
Somebody said today, how can we wave at the end of a Zoom meeting? Because when we leave a regular